I wish that the US would acknowledge that and encourage it and work with it, instead of always adopting this kind of hectoring, lecturing tone that somehow it's never good enough. I mean, when America needed allies in Afghanistan, in Iraq, where did they come from? Not the Indo-Pacific. They came from Europe.
First, officials from Russia and America are in Saudi Arabia to begin talks on ending the Ukraine war. But as European leaders also meet elsewhere, does Europe actually matter? Well, joining me is Jamie Shea, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary General at NATO. And his particular brief when he was there was emerging security challenges. Good afternoon, Mr. Shea.
Good afternoon there, Trevor.
Well, Mr. Putin emerged pretty damn fast, didn't he? But anyway, let's deal with the thing that we have to deal with today. I've been a bit snarky about this, but does Europe actually have any levers of influence?
Well, I do believe it does, Trevor, because the Americans have made it clear that they're turning to the Europeans to implement the peace agreement. That's the idea of a European peacekeeping force with European boots on the ground. And unless the Europeans take on that job, Mr. Trump's peace agreement, if he manages to get one, is going to look extremely sort of tentative and very flimsy indeed. So I think the Americans are definitely going to be dependent upon the Europeans to take on that role. And that will certainly give the Europeans leverage, provided that they make clear that they're willing and able to take it on. And that's why I think Keir Starmer over the weekend has indicated that the UK will be prepared to step up. Obviously, details, troop, mandate, equipment, duration, all of those things will have to be sorted out. And I expect other countries, I mean, France and Sweden have already indicated this, but other countries at the meeting in Paris will do the same. Similarly, Trump is going to have to look to the Europeans too to pay a large share of the reconstruction costs of Ukraine. And to the extent that Trump, usefully at least, has said that he wants a Ukraine which is still an independent sovereign state linked to the West, even if it's going to lose for a while some of its territory, then of course he's going to rely upon Europe and the EU in particular to support that. So I think the Americans may have won the first round, if you like, in terms of going it alone. But I think as they get into the nitty-gritty of real peace negotiations, real details, real commitments, then Europe will have its place if it's united and if it has something to put on the table.
But isn't part of the problem here that Donald Trump has rather changed the language and possibly the field of operation? It always used to be, if you like, the first article, the first song in the hymn sheet. We stand shoulder to shoulder on both sides of the Atlantic, that nothing will separate America from its European allies because we are interdependent and so on. Mr. Trump has been pretty clear. I mean, you couldn't be plainer when he says, you know what? There are thousands of miles of ocean between us and Mr. Putin and his tanks. You've got Mr. Putin on your land. You need to sort it out. Actually, you know what? Maybe if you don't want to do that, we might just decide that it's not worth the candle. We are going to go and look after the thing that really matters to us, which at the moment, which is China and the Pacific. There is a kind of element here that we assume that Trump will never do the thing that people in bargaining situations can sometimes do, which is to say, take this or leave it. I'm not bothered. I'm going to walk away if you don't want to.
Well, Trump said many of those same things, Trevor, during his first term, but ultimately he didn't do it. He stayed in NATO. He kept the United States forces in Europe. He even actually introduced more American forces and infrastructure. He sent, American strategic bombers and aircraft carriers over to Europe on NATO exercises. And actually, during his watch, he also admitted a new country into NATO in the shape of North Macedonia. So there was a bit of a dichotomy between what he said and what he actually did. And to some degree, the criticisms that he made of NATO in his first term, particularly regarding capability defence spending, are being remedied. I mean, NATO looks a lot stronger as far as the US is concerned, with Trump coming back. More countries spending 2%, some like Poland going to 4%, even 5%. NATO countries are reinvesting in defense production. They're modernizing their forces. Europeans are doing a lot more today to defend NATO's eastern flank than they were during the Cold War, when the task was essentially an American one. So to some degree, the sort of NATO that Trump wanted is now the NATO that exists. I think obviously the Europeans should get a little bit more credit and recognition for that. But you are right. This relationship has been good for the United States. It's helped America to lead the world. It's given America friends and allies. And you're right. A willful president like Trump could try to cancel it, although there is a large number of congressmen, including Republicans and women, who have voted to prevent the president from withdrawing from NATO without the consent of the Senate, and I don't think that would be given. So NATO still has its supporters in Washington.
Well, let's assume that even someone who considers himself as much of a radical as Mr. Trump decides that actually the United States really can't depart from what it's stuck to over the last, 70 or 80 years. Europe itself is not totally united. There's a variety of interests involved here. And as you said, different countries are contributing different levels of resource. And Poland commits 44% of its GDP. Lots of European states haven't even reached the 2% target. Let's first think, who's going to be in charge here? Are the Poles really going to be leading? Because they're very close to where their action is in Russia, and they are putting a lot of money in, and a lot of people, I think.
Well, I think what you're seeing, Trevor, is that a coalition of the willing is emerging within Europe. Unfortunately, it also now involves the UK increasingly. Keir Starmer will be at the meeting in Paris later this afternoon. The UK is now part of a group called the E4, where the UK Defence Minister meets regularly with counterparts from Poland, France and Germany. The UK has taken over the lead of this so-called Ukraine Defence Contact Group from the United States, which coordinates the European assistance to Ukraine. So I think...
Indeed, our Defence Minister chaired the meeting the other day.
Oh, pardon me?
I was just saying, our Defence Minister chaired the meeting of that group the other day, I think.
Absolutely, in Brussels, yes. So I think if you look at what's going on the ground, last year the European countries spent 20% more on defence. As I mentioned, a large number are now meeting the 2% commitment. Across Europe, you see countries forming partnerships and consortia to provide 155mm ammunition to Ukraine to train Ukrainian soldiers. The Europeans now are much more in the forefront, as I said, of defending the Baltic states and also the Black Sea littoral states. The United States is still very important, but a lot is happening in Europe. And I wish that the US would acknowledge that and encourage it and work with it, instead of always adopting this kind of hectoring, lecturing tone that somehow it's never good enough. I mean, when America needed allies in Afghanistan, in Iraq, where did they come from? Not the Indo-Pacific. They came from Europe. And I think this is an important point that all European leaders need to get across to President Trump.
But can I raise something that Zelensky said, and he has been saying pretty consistently for about 18 months, that Europe, I mean, America is still the biggest contributor to support of Ukraine, both in raw money terms, but also because it has specific capabilities, monitoring, surveillance, overflight, and all of those kinds of things that no one else has within the NATO alliance. But one of the things that Zelensky seemed to be rather sore about is that he felt that the European powers were supportive, but only to the extent of preventing Ukraine from losing, but not giving Ukraine enough of the right sort of support, kit, and so on to help them to win. Is there a danger that that's what's going to happen now, that the Europeans will say, okay, we're going to contribute, but we'll contribute at this level, which in reality we know will not allow Ukraine to win. All it will allow Ukraine to do is continue the war for year after year after year?
Well, Trevor, first of all, if Europe and the United States had not given that assistance, then Ukraine would today not be an independent state. The Russians would be in Kiev and they would have troops on the border with Poland. That's crystal clear. So it is this international aid which has allowed Ukraine to survive this onslaught for a remarkable 3 years. Secondly, I would dispute respectfully your statistics that America is doing the lion's share. And that's not true. At the moment, Europeans pay about $6 in support for Ukraine for every $4 that the United States spends. And Europe
I meant it in relation to each individual nation. I beg your pardon.
Well,
as a
yes,
single
it's
nation.
true, but then it's very difficult to compare a massive country with a vast continental economy like the United States with individual European countries. The European countries will, of course, always be in a difficult position there. But if you aggregate, if you like, the EU as an economy equivalent to that of the United States, a bit less, but still, the aggregate effort of the Europeans is considerable. And don't forget, that also means hosting 7 million Ukraine refugees for the last 3 years on our territory, including in the UK, something which the United States has not had
Totally fair point.